Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another individual album review. Today I'm reviewing an album that I was planning on reviewing months ago, or at the very least weeks ago, the newest Lee Owens album, Dreamstate. So, going back to about 2.5 years ago when I first started my blog, and I highly recommend that you don't read those reviews because they suck. The second album I ever reviewed on my blog was Lee Owens' 2022 album, LP8. Now, looking back at my reviews from then, I don't think a lot of them have aged all that well for me. Not just because the writing style is really cringeworthy in my opinion, but also because a lot of my opinions on those albums I don't really think have aged all that well. Yeah, it's all subjective, but a lot of those, looking back at it now, I do not agree with at all. And a lot of the time, I feel like I was either way too harsh or way too positive. And honestly, I think a lot of it was kind of forced. I felt like I had to have a super strong reaction to pretty much every album that I listened to, and really, a lot of the albums from back then I don't really remember all that well. And whenever I do go back to them, a lot of them I just try to figure out why was I giving those comments on those albums then? Like, what was it that I heard in this that told me it was so bad or so good? But anyway, look, that was the year that I turned 18. I was technically a child for the majority of that year, and I feel like that's around the time when most people's music taste is really formed. Although, like all of us, my music taste is still being formed, is still evolving. But look, you know what? All that aside, I went back to LP8 not too long before this review, and you know what? I was pleasantly surprised, or I shouldn't even say pleasantly surprised. I kind of expected to still feel the same about that one, and I do. I think it's a great album, albeit just barely. It actually ended up as the number 50 album on my top 50 albums of 2022. And again, looking back at that list, a lot of the albums on that list I just don't really think are nearly as good now as I did back then. And I'm not even sure I really thought that back then. And I think a lot of it was kind of forced because I wanted to fill out a top 50 list. And I didn't listen to as many albums that year as I usually do now. So I was trying really hard to try to find 50 albums that I would consider great. But a lot of them, looking back at it now, I definitely think I overhyped personally. But LP8, I definitely like it better than a lot of the albums that were on that list. And yeah, I think nowadays I look back at it and I think I probably rate it about the same now. It's a pretty great album. Again, I don't think it's amazing, but there is a lot to it that I really like. And I do want to talk a little bit about Lee Owens' other albums because I did listen to those in preparation for this review as well. And I think my favorite of Lee Owens' first three albums might have to be her self titled debut from 2017. I don't really feel like any of those albums are exceptional, even though I do like a lot of the experimentation and production on them. Yeah, there are some gorgeous moments, such as Nana Piano from LP8, but there are reasons why I haven't really gone back to that album a whole lot in the past few years, even though it was a nice breath of fresh air when I did. And 2020's Inner Song wasn't as much of the typical ambient sound that Kelly Lee has typically been known for, and it was more of an electronic dance album. And while I liked it, it just didn't have that same magic for me as her ambient projects. And even those ambient projects felt like they could have used more to truly wow me. But anyway, all of this brings me to her fourth studio album, which was released this October, Dreamstate, in which she delved completely into making full on house music, or at least the furthest thing from ambient music out of any of her albums. But even though I didn't really like Inner Song as much as her ambient projects, I was still quite curious about that album. I mean, it is Lee Owens. She doesn't have anywhere close to a bad album in her discography, and I was quite confident this would be good. And hey, she always has a lot of experimentation on her album, so I wondered if this could reach for new heights for her as an artist, and maybe even resonate with me more than LP8 did. So, I'll admit, I had a pretty good feeling about this. I wanted to give it a fair shot, and fuck, I don't even know what to say about this album. Look, I'm not gonna lie, I had a good feeling about this. Two of Lee Owens' first three albums are great in my opinion, even if just barely. And this album has been getting more acclaim than LP8. And the electronic elements of her music have always shown potential, and I'm not sure any of her albums sound more appealing on the title alone than Dream State, considering the type of music she makes. A lot of which has a really dreamy vibe to it. And look, I had a good feeling she was going to pull this off. But I didn't see this coming. Look, I wasn't prepared to do a review like this early in my days as a YouTuber. I thought it was going to be a fairly easy transition from what I already did on my blog just to video form. Because the vast majority of albums that I review are nothing exceptional, let's be honest. I mean, that's why some albums are considered exceptional, because there's not really much like that. But this went way beyond all of my expectations and came absolutely out of nowhere for me. And it's left me wondering what the best way to review this even is, because, well, this goes beyond just regular analyzation and trying to break down each individual song, partially because I felt this album on a deeper level than anything else I've heard in a long time, and partially because each song feels like it breaks the wall of meaning to the point where trying to analyze it just feels like it misses the point of the entire album. And it puts me in a bit of a tricky spot, because I want to give this a lot of attention, trust me, I really do. But look, okay, if you've been following me since my blog days, you may remember my comment on Within Temptation's Bleed Out, my album of the year in 2023, that the lyrics, while not mind-blowing, are exactly the kind of lyrics that that album needed. And once again with Dreamstate, I feel like it's similar, in that there aren't a ton of lyrics on this album. In fact, a few of these tracks are instrumentals, and there's a lot of lyrical repetition. And even in comparison to LP8, it doesn't feel like there's as much of a hidden concept where the specific details are supposed to reveal more potential meanings, but rather I think it's intended more as an experience to get lost in and eventually find your way back, mostly through the absolutely gorgeous production and amazingly well-crafted instrumentals, as well as Lee Owens' vocals. And speaking of which, yeah, I don't know what changed from her other albums here. I mean, she's always been a good singer, but her voice sounds stunning on this instrumentation. Not only has she improved a hell of a lot as a singer, but her voice fits perfectly with this production. It's fucking amazing. But alright, before I keep that non-stop train of thought going, I want to go through the track list and give some thoughts on each of these songs, starting with the opening track, Dark Angel. And I can absolutely understand why this was chosen as the opener. It's an instrumental introductory track that sets the scene, whatever you want it to be. I mean, whatever dream state you want to fall into on this album, that's up to you, and you've got to find your own magic in it. And with that steady pulse of the kick drum, with the awe-inspiring synthesizers and so many layers of instrumentation, all adding up to a truly euphoric, ensemble-like soundscape, this track completely pulls you into the experience and can stand on its own as a masterpiece. And I don't think it's a stretch for me to call it one. Seriously, everything about this opening track is damn near perfection. I haven't even mentioned the non-lyrical vocals, which essentially feel like another instrument in the mix and add so much to make this just wash over you, especially when the mixing is not only about as perfect as you could ask for, but it feels like it goes to a completely different level entirely of balancing the instruments incredibly well with each other, where certain elements may be more emphasized than others, but it all makes sense artistically and has some of the most beautiful textures you'll hear in any track this year. Seriously, this has the potential to completely distract you from any and all worries you may have, even if just for a moment. At least it does that for me. I mean, really, everything is just a moment in time, isn't it? And speaking of which, you truly enter the album's dream state on the title track, which follows Dark Angel. And while there are not many lyrics in this track, it's mostly repetition, it really cements that idea that you're allowing yourself to be temporarily in this dream state, where nothing is real and you just let yourself get lost in the music. And in what simultaneously could work as a dance floor anthem, we get some watery, warbly synthesizers and a super punchy percussion beat, but not too much to the point where the atmosphere is lost. Seriously, it's rare that I find a song that can work in either of these two specific contexts, but this song absolutely pulls that off. And I haven't even mentioned the vocals yet, which have some echo effects put on them, which completely brings the song in a direction you wouldn't be expecting at all, and it's absolutely incredible. Although I feel like the first real dance song on the album is Love You Got. And even then, it feels more like the album's centerpiece as a part of this emotional ride that the album takes you on. And I love that pulsating, bassy synth that continues throughout this track, through all the hazy production changes and unpredictability, where the love described in the song may be the only real thing the narrator feels is stable. And to bring this deeper, it may be self-love, which is a theme that comes back later in the album, and sometimes that's all we can count on to push us to keep going. And after wanting pure euphoria, you go higher and higher in the next track, that has some of the best dynamics in this entire album, and those stunning vocals completely wash over you. And it's the perfect song to follow Love You Got in the track list, where everything feels like it's transcending everything else. And this is before we get to Rise, where you realize that despite how bleak everything else may be, that feeling of pure euphoria can shine through, like the sun rising up. And I'm not sure there's a better musical representation for this than the eerie yet beautiful synth melodies, and some of the best production you'll hear in 2024. Now, this is the halfway point of the album, and I think it's where it starts to take a little bit of a shift, where we get easily the most mellow track on the album up to this point, Ballad in the End. Now, this track honestly reminds me a little bit of the opening track from that newest Halsey album, although that album doesn't have the same immaculate, glorious production that this album has, and I say that as someone who defended that record. Ballad in the End has some of the most beautiful strings I've heard in any song in 2024, and I like how this track serves as a reminder that you're only a small part of a much larger world, but it takes that realization and turns it into more of a feeling of validation than anything, because you're still just as important to yourself as you always have been. And I think that realization helps make a song like Sunshine feel a lot more worthy of going off as hard as it does and providing a sense of relief where something is clearly not quite right, and yet you may as well enjoy a really fun summer jam, which ironically might be more fitting for winter than anything. And I feel like if there's any song from this album that's going to go viral, it'll probably be this one, mostly because of the super hooky synth melody and the repetition of the vocals, and I don't know, it feels like a song that wasn't built for TikTok, but very well could end up blowing up over there. Now, the song Air, on the other hand, feels like it emphasizes the bleakness, but still provides a feeling of joy. And look, at this point, I'm sounding like a broken record, but it's mostly because of the absolutely phenomenal production. Seriously, I can't praise this enough. But look, I do want to talk about the final two tracks, starting with the penultimate track, Time To, which is simultaneously one of the most uplifting and also haunting tracks on the album, because it forces you to realize that sometimes going through difficult things makes you stronger. And not everything that seems bad on the surface is going to come back to bite you in the end. And while there's a feeling of relief in that, it also forces you to face challenges head on. And the want for pure peace of mind conflicts with that. And really, I think it's a phenomenal choice for the penultimate track, after everything else that's been on this album, because the whole thing is like a dream state, as the title would imply. But there's always a feel of joy and escape. Whereas this track makes you confront your demons. And the fact that it still has a dancey groove and catchy synth and vocal melodies, and a mostly upbeat sound, fits within the dreamlike setting of the album. In fact, I think this could have been a damn near perfect way to end the album, but then there's Trust and Desire, a song that left me absolutely speechless the first time I heard it, and still does every time I listen through this album. I mean, it's a snap back to reality, where the pain and troubles are finally at the forefront again, but there's a feeling of hope that can't be overtaken by anything. At least for a moment, where it feels like everything in the world is all right in front of you, going by at the speed of light. And you're left to figure it all out for yourself. Yeah, maybe I didn't describe this as well as I could have, but no pun intended, trust me, this is one of the best songs of 2024 by a landslide, and I can't think of a better way to end this album. And look, for an album that really represents self love and the realization that we each individually play a small part in a much larger world, I don't want to come on here and put this album on a pedestal. I feel like that's a job for the stands, for better or for worse, not the online music critic who loves to make small nitpicks and tell you why your favorite artist is only pretty good, if not outright mediocre or bad. But look, it's kind of hard not to. I don't know when the last time I've been able to say this about an album was, but literally every song on this album is amazing, and that's not an exaggeration. And even picking a worst song for this album doesn't even feel fair, because I'm not sure I could find a flaw in a single song here, even if I tried. Now, before you get too excited, I should stress that I don't necessarily believe in perfect albums. And thus, my rating system is not entirely based on positives versus flaws. And even though I think this is about as close as you can come to making a perfect album, when albums resonate with me this much, I feel like I need to completely rethink the idea of the meaning of my rating system and what each rating represents. And thus, if you were expecting a 10 out of 10, and I don't blame you if you were, I get how it might have sounded like it, I am going to give this a 9.5 instead. Look, I thought about giving it a 10, it was certainly close, but if you want to know what is worthy of a 10 out of 10 score, I think that's a conversation for another day, the day when I do finally give out that score for the first time. But look, I don't want any of this to distract from the fact that Dreamstate is an absolutely jaw-dropping album. And honestly, I don't even know what else to say at this point. I was not expecting this at all. Again, I knew Lee Owens was a good artist. I had no doubt this would be good. I thought it would be great. I had a feeling this would be her best album to date, but this, I don't know. This part of the review is unscripted. I know this review is kind of rushed. I wanted to go in more detail, but I've got year-end lists coming up. I got a bunch of stuff coming up. But yeah, I did not want to ignore this. Like, obviously, I'll be talking about this at the end of the year, there's no question, but I really didn't want to skip over making this review. I really felt like, of all the albums I want to review right now, this is the one I really wanted to make a video for, its own video where I could go through each track individually. And yeah, like, I was not expecting this at all. I don't know. I feel like I'm out of words to say at this point. So, just to give a quick update on year end lists, I might be done with reviewing albums for this year. I'm not entirely sure yet because I wanted to review the new Kendrick Lamar album. I haven't heard it yet. I'll definitely listen to it. I wanted to review that Billie Eilish album that came out months ago. I was going to review it way back. I wanted to review that 21 Pilots album. I feel like I keep saying I'm going to review the Gracie Abrams album that dropped earlier this year. There's a lot of albums I want to review, trust me. But I don't know, the year's coming close to an end and I still have 5 lists I want to make. I may end up skipping over the 10 worst albums just to save time, but I don't know. We'll see. I think I'm going to do the top 10 best and worst hit songs, the top 10 worst albums, and then the top 50 songs and top 50 albums. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. I definitely want to do at least 4 of those lists. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. For now, thank you for watching this video. Again, it might be my last review of the year, but we'll see. I really, next year, I really, really want to get back to a habit where I actually review a lot more albums and I don't take these long breaks from reviewing, and I don't know, I feel fairly optimistic I'll be able to do that. We'll have to see, but for now, thank you for watching. I will see you all again soon.